Parcel Unpacked registration email. And I'll kick this off and say I am lucky enough that when Mark and I started working on a project or we were discussing Parcel Unpacked, Mark always raises his hand and is like, can we build a cool email for this? I never have to chase him down. He's just always there and eager to be involved. And this theme of Parcel Unpacked, I mean, we talked about it briefly yesterday, just that we wanted the theme this year to outline that there are so many levels that go into marketing. There are copywriters, designers, developers, marketers, marketing ops, and we all have different levels of learning, all different experiences. We all got here in different ways. And this gamified, nostalgic world was what came out of it. So when Mark said, can we create a cool email? I said, yes, absolutely, absolutely. So Mark, I will pass it over to you. I think we're all excited to see.
Yeah, so we just got to do this live quickly. Tea break tips, cup of tea, cheers. Right. Okay, so let's try and share my screen. Hopefully this is the right one. Yeah, that's the one. Okay, so yeah, creating this email was a lot of fun. Really, what made it a lot easier was having like this great design to work from. So we already had this design for the landing page, and I sort of just copied that and reused the assets for the email. So having a great designer makes my job a lot easier, and then also having the team around to sort of allow me to do this is cool. But saying all that, we were still quite tight on time. I don't want to spend too much time on this because this is an optional extra thing. We just want to be a bit fun. So yeah, time was always something that was always consideration here. So if we look at the code here, it's, let's have a look, 34 lines of code. So that's sort of pretty small. This is because it's based on components. So we've got our outer components here, our unpacked base and unpacked section. Then down here somewhere, we've got our call to action, our unpacked CTA. So these are components that I already had, that I had for like our parcel base, parcel section, parcel CTA. And I just duplicated them and then made a couple of small changes so they're suitable for this. So that took no time at all. If this was going to be a reusable campaign, because this is sort of just a bit of a one-off thing, but if we're going to be sending loads of Parcel Unpacked emails all in this theme, then I might have, and over time as well, then I maybe would have adapted our original components so I could just have a little variable and switch. But yeah, this just made more sense to do it quickly on this one, so I wasn't interfering with our components we use for our regular emails. So here, yeah, as you see, it's 34 lines of code, so it's nice and small and compact. But I'm just going to switch over to the rendered view so we can see the full email, how it came. So this is the email that I got sent. This is the one that hit my inbox. It's the same that would have, hopefully you would have received as well, and come into your inbox too. The other thing I'm just going to do, actually, I'm just going to drop into the chat a link to the View Online version. So if you wanted to look at that at the same time. So this is much bigger. Now we're up to, was it 473 lines of code. So yeah, it got bigger. But just want to sort of talk through a few of the things we've got going on here. So we've got our nice headline here, a little image at the top, a couple of paragraphs, nice call to action, the interactive game, which I'm going to get onto a bit later on. But yeah, this is pretty cool. I enjoyed making that. Got some cool gradient text, and then just a little footer. So it's not a big email. If we go through here, it's lots of pretty standard stuff. I've got the web fonts going on. So if you caught the session yesterday, Anne and Megan were talking about the different styles of coding. I'm probably more in line with what Megan was doing, I think, with things. But anyway, there's all these different ways, and it's sort of bits of this and bits of that. There's no hard and fast rules we need to follow. But one mistake I made here, I know everyone likes to look at the mistakes, is I'm actually pulling in 4 web fonts. I'm only using 2. This is because when I went to Google Fonts, I didn't clear out the web fonts that are already selected, so I accidentally put in too many. So that's a bit of a frustration. But other than that, I'm just putting in these links to put in the web fonts, and I'm adding this media screen attribute onto these links. So Outlook will ignore it. So there's an issue with Outlook where it will revert to sort of the default font rather than using your fallback font. But adding this media screen fixes that issue. So then if we look down into the code, another thing which I wanted to pull out was this gradient text we've got down here. It's cool. It's a cool little enhancement. It's not a big chunk of code. It's not going to work everywhere, but it falls back cleanly. And the reason it falls back cleanly is because I'm using this supports query here. So I've got supports WebKit background clip text and WebKit text fill color transparent. So we need both of those here just to make sure it supports well. There was some issues with some email clients recognizing one and not the other, so then the effect didn't work. I will call out another sort of slight mistake here as well, because I know you love hearing about mistakes, is the color contrast on the right is good. On the left, it's just a little under. So there is a small accessibility issue there. It does pass all the accessibility tests, but that's because it's taking it on the fallback color rather than the gradient text. So the way the gradient text works, I'll just comment this out quickly. You can see this is just putting a background gradient on these 3 paragraph tags, and then that's setting a background, and then we're clipping the background with the background web clip text. That's clipping it to just around the text, but because the text is still on top of it, you can't see that gradient. So then we set the background, the text fill color to transparent, and you see the text come through. It's kind of cool. And that's not going to work in many places. It's, Apple Mail, I think Samsung supported it as well, maybe a couple of other places. And one surprising one is Outlook, and those Outlooks, the Microsoft Word Outlooks, do support this because we're using word art. Now, Microsoft Word does have this built-in word art feature, which is cool, and you can do some really fancy modern designs. If you live in the 90s, then they're fancy and modern. I live in the 90s, so it's cool to me. So we've got a few styles on here. MSO style text fill type gradient will give us a gradient text fill. MSO style text fill gradient fill shade type linear, so it's a linear gradient. And then this is I'm going to go through this. The angle here is 2,700,000. So 2,700,000 is the angle, which is 60 thousandths of a degree. So divide 2,700,000 by 60,000, and that'll give you the angle. But also with CSS, the angle starts from the top, but in Word, the angle starts from the left. So it slightly confuses things even further. And then we've got a stop list, which is very similar to the stop list we have here of our 2 colors and the positions. So it's I've put them next to each other here. So we've got the 0 for the first color and 100,000 for the second. So that's the position done as a percentage and as a thousandth of a percent, because why not do it as a thousandth and do the angle as 60 thousandth, because Microsoft. So this is 0% and 100%. Then we've got our colors, then -1, which does something I'm not 100% sure on. I think it's to do with the layers and how the colors layer on top of the text. And then finally, we've got an opacity, which again is set in thousandth of a percent. So 100,000 is a 100% opacity there as well. So what else did I want to show on here? So another cool thing, again, we've got those call to actions. I've got a nice little gradient background there. Gradients work surprisingly well in email, actually. There's quite decent support. It's not full support, but it's worth looking at, and they fall back cleanly to just a solid color. So as long as you set a fallback color, then it's worth experimenting with. So here is just setting the background image linear gradient, and then I've got my gradient and the stops there. So that's going to work in a fair few places. Doesn't work in Outlook.com or the Outlook mobile apps or the new Outlook the progressive web app, the new version of Windows Outlook. But what does work is if you add this code up here, which is an embedded SVG background. So essentially what this is doing is we're drawing a small SVG, a tiny little SVG square, and we're applying a linear gradient to that SVG. Then we are taking the code for that SVG and we're doing a sort of a base 64 encoding of it, or a version of a base 64 encoding of it, and then setting that as the background image. And that will give you a gradient background. This is also, incidentally, if you just want to set a solid background on this, this is a sort of a way to set a background for dark mode in Outlook when you're having those issues, but then the foreground hits issues as well. So I'm not going to dig into that too much. So that's a cool little thing I wanted to show you there on gradients. And then we get into all the code for the game, which I'm going to talk about in a second. But I just want to show one more thing, which I quite liked playing with in this. If I just go down to the so in the head here, we've got our logo, Parcel Unpacked logo, and we've got this games cartridge. And I wanted it to sort of stack next to each other, but kind of go overlap slightly, but not fully overlap, and trying to get this layout to work how I wanted. And I wasn't entirely sure exactly what I wanted this to do, but so I wasn't entirely sure how to code it, because I was still sort of designing in the code editor, as it were. But what I ended up with is, hang on, let's just focus in on this. Use the Parcel tools. So we've got this div with max height 0. So if I just set this here, we can see this max height 0, which is giving us the div at the top, and we can see this blue line at the very top of the screen there, which is representing that div. And then the image is falling out the bottom of it, where it's overflowing into the content below. If we take the max height off, you can see that that's going to increase the size of that, and it doesn't look so good anymore. Now setting this to text line right, so this is an image which is an inline element, it's going to align to the right. And then set max width 40%, so it adjusts as we shrink the screen down. None of this works in Outlook, so what I've done in Outlook is I've used an align right. So this is the same as sort of float right, but for Outlook. And we talked about floats a bit yesterday in one of the tea break tips. But I don't want that float applying anywhere else, so I've set the float none. So this is just playing around with some things, trying to get it how I wanted it, and I was quite happy with the end result here. And it's not a lot of code. There's not nested tables and any complicated stuff like that. It's just a few lines of code to get this layout how I wanted it. The other thing is we've got our H1 here. We've got it is using an image, and you will hear me talk about don't put images, don't put text in images unless you have to. In this case, I was sort of back and forth about it a bit, but I think this logo is important to keep that font. I think that adds to it. So I kept the font there as I wanted it, and done it as a image. This is still inside an H1, so you can put your text inside a heading element like this. Does count as a heading. So this is the alt text here, which is Parcel Unpacked, does count as the H1 text. So that's sort of the basic sort of setup of the email. But the bit which I think a lot of you will be interested in is the game part of it. So it's just, so if I go back to the component-based version of this, so here we've got the game, and the game is just this one little line of code to pull that in because it's a component. So there's a number of advantages of doing it this way. One is it's reusable. I could just drop that bit of code into another email, and then we've got that game in there as well. And it's very small. It just keeps, like, this was what I say, 34 lines of code. So it keeps it nice and condensed, which is good, and it makes this code nice and readable. And the other thing is, if I then go and open, if I just sort of hit Command and then click on the component in Parcel, then that should open it. Or is it not? Because it's screen sharing, it's going weird. Oh no, it's coming. then that will take me through to the component code. So if you're using components, hold down Command or Control on Windows, I think, and then click on the component, and it will take you through to the source of that. It's a really nice shortcut. So in here, there is a lot of code. So this is a big chunk. This is 268 lines of code. So it's a lot more going on. And this is giving us the game. One of the other advantages as well I wanted to mention is because I've got a lot of code here and I've got a lot of code in the rendered email, trying to build interactive emails sort of directly into a full template can get really confusing because you've got all the rest of your layout HTML, you've got all your other styles going on for like styling other bits, your default styles, and it's frustrating and it gets lost. So having it here, so every piece of code in this code window here is to do with the game. So let's talk through the game a bit. So I'll just grab a bit of water. Sorry, I'm just on the COVID recovery path, so my voice might be going a little bit. Apologies for that. So for the game, I hit start and you start running and then you hit this Outlook bug. So you've got to try and jump over it. This is very much based on the Chrome Dino game when you don't have the internet and you've got the little dinosaur jumping over the cactus. I love that game. So you run along and then hit the jump key. So the jump key is grayed out and you can't click it until it turns purple, and then you can click. So you've got to time it right, and if you don't time it right, then you hit bug and the game's over. So how does all of this work? So let's start with looking at a bit of the HTML. So for the controls here, I've got a few radio buttons. I'm using a play button here. This is a radio button which will triggered by clicking the start game button, and then I've got jump 1, jump 2, and then there's a reset button to reset everything. So what a reset button does, which I'll just show you the reset, is here. The input type reset will reset all of your values, your default values to your HTML. So whether an input is checked or not checked, if there is default text in text input or anything like that, it resets all of that back to initial state. So it's a nice simple way to restart it. And for this to work, you do need to wrap it in a form element as well. So let's just restart that. So let's have a look. If I show you the animations. So if we look at the animations here, we've got keyframes. We've got the city midground and the city foreground here. So as we start the game, you see the background starts moving. So what we have the city mid, which is the sort of the middle bit there. You can maybe see it a little bit, the sort of the dark purple buildings, not the ones right in the far background, they stay still. So I've got that background image. If I just hold that, you can't really see that very well, but it's 45 m wide. And but then the element that it's on, or the pseudo element that it's on, is 90 m wide. So what I'm doing is then setting animation to translate it minus 45. So it's just moving it across the screen, halfway across the screen. Then the second one is the foreground, which is these buildings at the front, the bigger buildings with brighter lights on them. That is again 45 m wide, but this time the pseudo element is 135 m, so it's 3 times the width, and the translate is minus 90, so that's moving across minus 90. So you're left with that last 45. So because these are both set to 10 seconds animations, they will repeat, and because the foreground is moving further, then it moves faster. So as we click start, we see these two moving separately. So next up, let's look at the jump animation. So the jump animation here is, you can see this background image that I'm setting it to. This is just changing the background image to this sort of somersault, jumping somersault. And also I'm setting the translate to minus 4m. So that's just moving the div up and down again and changing the background image. But because it's sort of the timed with the jump and the movements, it does look like a jump. So That's how that part works. We have this twice. You'll notice we've got jump 1 and jump 2. This is because when it's set to jump, so when you click the jump button, it triggers the radio button and it clicks on the next radio button 1. And that will set this animation to play. And then when you click on the next jump button, that will trigger radio button 2, which will set jump button 2 animation to play. We can't just do the same animation on the same elements because it's already set. So you can't just say play this again because it's already been applied. You can't just apply it again. So you need to remove it and then put it back on, or do 2 identical animations. There's a few techniques for doing this, but this is sort of the best one I found for this particular scenario. So also when you click the radio button, that's what makes the object move. So the object moves across from the side and it comes over and it hits the character. So just hitting the radio button does that. When you click the jump button, then again, it's doing a similar thing, is it's moving one object across, then you hit jump and it cancels that animation, and then it plays the next animation, so the next object comes across. And the faux jump here, this is just to set the grey overlap on the jump button so you can't click it ahead of time. So this is how we play the game, so it's you can't click too early, otherwise it's just going to keep resetting. So you need to sort of have something to block that. And then the final part, which is what I think is the clever bit, is the game over. So the game over works, you've got your animation. So as you animate this, the block comes towards you, and then you click the button and it starts the next animation, cancels that animation, starts the next animation. What's also happening in the background is we have this game over overlay screen, which is, this is always here. This screen is always here. It's just behind the other screens. So it's set to animation delay 1.7 seconds, which is how long it takes for the block to come across, to the Outlook bug to come across and hit you. So then you jump over it at that point. So if you don't jump over it at that point, then the animation completes and then this game over overlay sits on top of the rest of the game. However, if you do click the button, then it moves and starts playing game over 2, and it starts this 1.7 second countdown until you click the jump button. Then it'll start the next one. It'll start this 1.7 second countdown, and back and forth until you don't do it in time, and then that's the game over. So if I just end a game here, then I'll just go into the code and I will show you. So here I've got the overlay, and if I just remove the position absolute, you can see this is all going on behind still. So this is still going on in the background. Sorry. So what else did I want to look at? I wanted just to talk a little bit about accessibility. Interactive email on the whole is not very accessible. There's certain things you can do. Generally, you may hear me talking about always sort of make sure you don't set inputs to display none, because it takes them out the flow. So users can still interact with the keyboard if they are in the flow and they're not set to display none. However, in this case, we don't want the user interaction because the game doesn't play with a keyboard. It's just not, it doesn't work because we have the grey jump button over the top of the active jump button. And if you were doing it with a keyboard, you would always be able to hit those buttons. So it doesn't quite work in the same way. So, and also screen readers, we couldn't quite work out a way to do this because it's a very visual game. It's very much visual triggers and visual cues and mouse interactions. So if I actually it's probably easier if I show it in if we look at the accessibility tree in DevTools. So if you're not familiar with this is a little relatively new part of DevTools. You've got the accessibility tree, so you can see here. So you can see the game.
Hey, Mark.
Oh, hi.
I don't think the accessibility tree is showing.
Oh, you're not seeing this? Okay.
Yeah.
In that case, I won't show that.
Okay.
Do you see the DevTools? Does that come through?
No, you're just hovering over the preview there.
Is it just black? Okay, let's get rid of that. That's a shame. That should have been working. Oh, Okay, never mind. Ignore that. So what I've done instead, if we go down, so I've got this. The game is set to role article. So an article is a self-contained piece of content. Often we hear the word article and we think article of like a news article or a blog article. Those are just types of article. The word article means item. It's much broader meaning than that. And in terms of accessibility, it's a self-contained piece of content that works standalone outside of the context of the rest of the page. So this game fits that description. And I've got an ARIA label on there, so I'm describing what this article is. It's a CSS-powered email game. So screen reader users will follow that. And then further down, I've just set the background to be a role image, and I've set ARIA label on there to work as alt text, just so if somebody is sort of partially sighted and using a screen reader, they can see this image, they can see sort of maybe a blur of the image, then they understand what this image is of. So that is how that game came together. A couple of things that I wanted to point out quickly is the file size. A lot of the time we think interactive email is going to be huge. This is just over 21 kilobytes, so that's under half the average email file size, so it's still very small. And if we look at the images, our images are 670 kilobytes, which is also pretty small comparatively. I've got 20 images, which is quite a lot, and maybe I should have combined some of these. I could have like saved a bit on number of requests, and also probably saved some total file size as well if I combined some of the images together a bit more. But still, it's still working pretty lightweight. And one of the reasons for that is because I've used animated PNG images. So if we look at an image like this one, this is our fallback image. This is an animated PNG. Compared to the GIF version, this is about 10% smaller file size, but it's a much better quality image because of this gradient work there. Also, the other one, which is, I believe, let's find it, this one. So this is, you can see the animation on the signs here. This one saved about 40% file size compared to the GIF because of the transparency in there as well. So it's a big file saving. Animated PNG images work in most places, not completely everywhere. Windows Outlook, still no support, and Gmail, frustratingly, doesn't support. But both of those will fall back to a static PNG. And I think in this case, where the static is the animation's quite subtle, it's not very important, it's just these signs flashing. Removing that animation is not a big hit to the user experience. So I think that's still quite a useful look, still looks good. So yeah, there we go. Hope you enjoyed that. And yeah, I don't know if we've got time for questions or if we're going to jump straight over to the next part.
Yeah. We have a question here from Alice. Mark, how much time did it take you to build this email in hours?
So it's probably about 2 days, I think, of building and testing in total, but there's other work going on at the same time. So it's probably a full day to get, from start to finish, I think.
Okay, that's a good chunk of time, but well worth it. We have a question from Renee in the chat. How could we follow you, Mark? That was pretty awesome.
Following me, yes. So I'm not really on the Twitters anymore because I used to use TweetDeck and that's not really available. So I'm on Blue Sky, I'm on Mastodon, I'm on Email Geek Slack mostly. So Email Geek Slack is the best place to find me because I'm always on there, which is email.geeks.chat. Is that or something like that? No, geeks.chat. Somebody will post the URL. But the I'm Mastodon. I'm sort of M_J_Robbins and Blue Sky as well. So you can find me. Generally, I'll go by that handle most places. And yeah, on LinkedIn, I'm on occasionally, so you can look me up on there under the Parcel team.
Perfect. We have one more question here from Lauren. Did you work on a fallback for email ESP that don't support this code?
Yeah, so where the code isn't supported, we'll just get a static image instead of the game. The gradient call to action links will just be a solid color, and the gradient text will just be a solid color. So there's different fallbacks going on in different places, but all of them are sort of falling back to similar clean experiences.
Very good. Okay, well, that wraps up this portion. Abby's joining us now. Let me just